So, John, thank you so much for speaking to me today. I just want to first ask you about your career and how you actually got into presenting horse racing and what you're doing today.
Well, I went to university with the desire at some point to get into sports writing. I didn't study journalism at university, but I did go to university with the idea of being a sports writer. Did lots of work for student newspaper, et cetera, when I was there. And then when I got out of university, I did my postgraduate diploma in journalism. And then when I left university, there was a job that came up at Weatherby's, working as a writer on the staff for them. So I did that for a year and a half. And then I got a job as a voiceover at SIS. So it kind of just, I sort of got into broadcasting slightly by accident. I didn't really necessarily want to be a broadcaster when I was 18 and packing my bags and to go to university, but I kind of ended up what happened really. So there we go.
Yeah, so obviously you work for SIS, you work for Hong Kong, you've done all that. How's your experience in Hong Kong? Because you lived out there for a few months, I'm guessing, working on the racing.
No, I was there for 3 years in the end, and my experience in Hong Kong was marvelous. It was hard work, but it was the great thing about going to somewhere like Hong Kong is you are exposed to a kind of completely different racing environment. So it's horse racing, but there are things about horse racing in Hong Kong which are different to horse racing here. And what is required from a good broadcast is different over there to over here. What is required from a good race call as well. So all those things really sharpened me up. It was a little bit difficult from a family perspective, get my wife and my only daughter at the time to settle. My other daughter was born there. But I learned a hell of a lot, and I am much better race caller now, much better broadcaster now than I was before I went to Hong Kong, definitely. So it was a really worthwhile experience.
And then that difference between race calling and presenting, because obviously when sometimes when you're not presenting on Sky Sports, you're calling at race courses. What's the difference in like the prep and how you need to go about doing certain things? Because obviously when you present on Sky, you can read the stats out and preview the race, but when you're race calling, it's different, isn't it? Because you've got to call the horses home, is it?
Yeah, it's they're different. They're different disciplines. Obviously, I enjoy both. The calling, I'm lucky, touch wood, this might come back to haunt me in a few weeks, but I've got a pretty good memory for race colours and horses' names. Doesn't mean to say I don't make errors. I make errors just like some of my colleagues do as well. We're all prone to errors now and again, but I am pretty good at remembering names of horses and colours and stuff. I still have to do the prep, but it's something that I'm reasonably naturally good at. Certainly might not be when I get older, but we'll see. You have to do research for those races as well, especially those races when there is, it's a long 3-mile chase or whatever, and there's only 4 or 5 runners, and you've got to sort of have a bit more of a narrative to the race as well, rather than just identifying horses. The presenting I really enjoy because it allows me to bring my own sort of take on things, my own personality to the to a program, and also, obviously I do a lot of international racing for Sky, which is something I really enjoy as well. Obviously the Hong Kong racing on a Wednesday as well. You have to do a lot of prep for that, otherwise you'll end up looking like a bit of an idiot. But you are helped in that by your producer. We have some very good assistant producers and researchers at Sky, so I can come in of a morning and I'm told I'm interviewing so-and-so for part of the show, and then somebody will have prepared chapter and verse on their stable form at the moment if they're a trainer, and their horses that are running over the weekend and stuff like that. So you are helped very much by extra people at Sky. When you're standing up on in a gantry at a racetrack, though, you're very much on your own as a commentator, and you live and die by the accuracy or not of your race calls.
And you talk about like a gantry on your own. What have you ever been to a point where it's been really foggy and misty and you can't see the horses, and you may be having to rely on spotters on the race course to tell you about the horses?
I've been at Hexham once when it was very, very murky, and as someone who's from Hexham, I know all about that. Been at Exeter one day when you couldn't see past the nose on your face, but as others of my colleagues will tell you, that's that's a kind of once a year at least occurrence at Exeter on the Holden Hill. You just have to trust yourself to look. Often in that situation as well, you might get a camera that is on a car next to the horses, so you can see a little bit of what's going on. I remember at Exeter though, just admitting that I couldn't see what was going on, and I said, I can't see them now. You'll have to wait until they come back in Division 4. I say anything, because you can't sort of make stuff up. You've just got to call it as you see it.
Is that a tough job sometimes? Because sometimes the viewers obviously rely on the commentary and they're like, when we don't know what's going on. But is that a scary room for you because you feel like I'm letting people down, or is it just having to deal with the elements?
I do. I'm always conscious of the fact that somebody's switched on their television or is there at the racetrack and has invested their hard-earned cash, and what they want from me primarily is accuracy. That's the main thing you need to be as a race caller. You can have all the clever lines and all that stuff, and that's great, and some of my colleagues are really good at that, but you'll never get anywhere as a race caller if you're not accurate, and if you make major errors at a regular level. Now, as I say, touch wood, I haven't made any major ones yet. I've made quite a few minor ones. So you're very, very conscious of making sure you get things as right as you possibly can, because you don't want to be screaming one home as horse X when it's horse Y, and the person who's had that bet on is going to be rightly rather angry with you.
Is that the same with photo finishes? How do you judge them? Because I remember speaking to Richard Hoyles a few months ago, and he said in a photo finish what he always thinks the horse who's won he uses first. Do you go down that same mantra, or do you try and not call photo finishes in case you're wrong?
It's funny, you kind of do it on a case-by-case basis. I mean, sometimes you'll see horses cross the line and you think, I've definitely seen A defeating B there, and I'm just going to call it. If you're right on the line, and most commentary boxes are right on the line, I have relative confidence in my ability to do it. Again, I've made some nulls ups. I did one at Huntingdon last year, which I just got wrong. I said A had beaten B and B had beaten A. But in those situations, I think I just trust my judgment. And if I don't know, I will just say. And sometimes you'll not know, and then you'll see the slow motion replay, and it's obvious. And people say, "Oh, what's that commentator doing? He's talking absolute nonsense, blah blah blah." Surely you can see that. You've just got to go on what you see. And as I say, hopefully most of the time I get it right, but inevitably I get the odd one wrong. But I don't sort of try and make my name as a race caller by someone who always calls tight photo finishes. If I think I've seen something that I'm pretty keen is correct, I'll say it, and if not, I'm quite happy to say photo, etc., etc.
And then also, obviously, I think 3 weeks ago today, actually, you presented the Melbourne Cup on Sky. How was that experience for you?
Well, it was great. I mean, I don't really have a particular, apart from Hong Kong and here, around the rest of the world, I don't sort of have a racing jurisdiction that I'm concentrating on every single day. So I would not say that I'm an expert in Australian racing at all. But it was great to get the gig, because it's one of the great sort of races around the world. I threw myself into the form for it. I had a great co-presenter in Jim McGrath, and it went really well. We managed to stay awake all night. The race itself was marvelous. A really tremendous winner. Very Elegant is a lovely horse, and she, to lump that weight over a trip that she wasn't necessarily guaranteed to be at her best at, it was a great occasion. And you also realise how well our broadcast colleagues over there in Australia do the job as well. So it was very good. I didn't get much sleep that night, but it was worth it.
There was also a point in the night, I think I remember, where the feed went down and you and Jim had to fill for a while. Well,
yeah, you got to do that in broadcasting. You've got to have enough up your sleeve that if you have got 10 minutes to fill, you've got something to talk about, and that's why you always have to be well prepared. Going into a TV program is a bit like doing an exam. You have to prepare for all eventualities, and sometimes some of the stuff you revise for an exam you don't need. But you have to have it there just in case, and it was exactly the same for me there. And like I say, I was very, very lucky, because J.A. McGrath is steeped in Australian racing, steeped in the Melbourne Cup. He could talk for hours on it, so I was just hopefully asking one or two pertinent questions, and that was that.
Yeah, because but is it scary though, or I said you're perfect, but it's scary when it happens because you kind of not thrown into it, but you've got to think, right, I need to be on the game here in case you.
Well, it's scary if you don't have much experience, but as you get more experience as a broadcaster, you understand ways of, sorting yourself through it. I remember one time when I was a very young broadcaster on SIS, there were problems with pictures, and I was brought back into vision to fill, and I got tongue-tied and nervous because it never happened to me before. But I was only 7 or 8 months into the job. I was 23 years old. I wasn't really particularly comfortable in doing what I was doing. But now I'm sadly much older, plenty more experience, and it wasn't really a huge issue. But as I say, it's always something you've got to be prepared for. Live TV keeps you on your mettle. But I enjoy it when that red light comes on. The adrenaline gets going, and you're nervous, but you enjoy it. It's nervous enjoyment.
And then obviously from the broadcast perspective, how much does like the director and producer in the earpiece help you like with cues and that, and thinking you've only got like 2 minutes to go and you've got to do this?
Yeah. Well, again, I mean that's an element of broadcasting which is not easy to get used to, and you have to do it. If you're going to be a presenter, you can't turn off the talk back. You have to have that in your ear. Yeah, we're very lucky at Sky. We work with a lot of people who are very, very experienced in television as far as that respect is concerned. There's a good mix at Sky of people who are very experienced TV makers, and also people who produce are very knowledgeable on horse racing. And it all just works out. I've really enjoyed it. I enjoyed working for the old ATR, but I really enjoy working for Sky as well. And yeah, it's just something you get used to. Occasionally you miss your cue, or you miss your you're off or you're on, but again, that's just occupational hazard.
And what's it like working with Matt Chapman, and whether you've worked with him before? Because on TV, he seems such a great character, very hyper and loves the racing. What's it like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've worked with Matt for many years on and off. I would be lying if I said I know him personally particularly well. I've always enjoyed working with him, and I've always felt he's extraordinarily knowledgeable. I sometimes, when I was working with him, certainly when in my younger days, would think, blimey, he knows much more about this than I do. But yeah, I've always enjoyed working with him. He's generally speaking very good humored, and I think he does a very, very good job in all aspects of the game, whether he's working for ITV or whether he's working for Sky. And he's done some of the best pieces of racing television that I've ever seen in my life, actually. There's an interview on YouTube from a few years ago, him with the late great Sir Henry Cecil, which is one of the best pieces of sports interviewing you're ever likely to see. And there was something on the channel the other week, him and Paddy Brennan, which again, as someone who's interested in horse racing, but has been in horse racing a long time, and sometimes thinks, oh, I've seen this sort of stuff before. I was watching that interview captivated, because he was getting stuff out of a jockey which sometimes other people can't. So I think he's a top class broadcaster, no doubt about it.
And you were saying like about, especially the Melbourne Cup, Jim McGraw and his knowledge of Australian racing. Do you feel like sometimes you still learn stuff on the job, like stuff you maybe didn't even know, even though you've been in it for a long time? Do you still feel that? Always.
Racing is such an enormous sport in terms of the level of analysis. For instance, sectional timing. I fully admit that before I went to Hong Kong, sectional timing was something I thought, well, yes, I can understand where this is coming from. But for me, it was just I always felt it was sort of slightly overcomplicating things. And I'm thinking all these boffins bringing this into my form study of handicap ratings and whether they like the ground, whether they like the track, all that sort of stuff. But when I went to Hong Kong and I realized how important those were there, I had to learn quite quickly on the job to understand them and understand, what constitutes a good run from a sectional perspective and what doesn't, et cetera, et cetera. And, I've learned hell of a lot about that over the last 6 or 7 years. Race calling, you're always learning stuff. You go to a track and think, well, I wasn't very good. I called the 1.5 mile point, the 10 furlong point or whatever at a certain track, and think, well, next time I'm back there, make sure you know where certain points are on the track so you don't make that mistake again. You're always learning in this game, and if you feel like you have got it licked, you've got usually a very rude shock around the corner.
And obviously you've got to think about demographics when you broadcast. And do you feel like you can hit those target audience, especially people who are new to racing, trying to explain things simply and make them understand it, rather than using language that you could say racing boffins, if you just mentioned no?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's a very, very difficult circle for people to square, and I don't like to really wade into that debate a great deal when it comes to judging fellow broadcasters, because I know that if I was working for terrestrial television, trying to walk that sort of tightrope between not alienating racing fans and also bringing new people into the sport is a very difficult one to walk along. And I think ITV Racing, generally speaking, do it extremely well. They get flack for it in other areas from people who are maybe more interested in the sort of the nuances of form study and stuff, but I generally speaking think ITV do a very good job. It's difficult on Sky. We're still generally catering for a more racing orientated audience. I often go into fairly technical stuff, especially when I'm doing the Hong Kong program and well, the American program as well. I've never been told, you've got to try and make it a bit easier to understand. But I think it is also very important not to patronize your audience. Racing form study can be a little bit complicated, but it's not brain surgery. And I think I've been at racetracks with people who have got the hang of things quite quickly, from a fairly novice-y starting position. So I think you've got to make sure that you don't patronize people as well, and don't think, oh, this is so complicated that no one can understand it unless they've had years and years of experience with it. To understand it really well, you've got to have lots of experience, but you can get to a fairly decent point quite quickly, I think. So I think you should try and explain, but don't patronize too much.
And then obviously for prep wise now, when you do a race course, do you look at the horses the night before, or do you kind of leave it till the day, or do you do anything beforehand to?
It depends. A lot of it depends on how busy I am the day before. If I'm working at Sky and then I've got Newcastle the following day or something like that, I can't really do much preparation the following day. I remember doing the Redcar 2-year-old trophy meeting a couple of years ago. And of course, the 2-year-old trophy's got 24, 26 runners in. And I remember thinking, and it was obviously going out on ITV as well. And I remember thinking to myself, if there's ever a race call I can't cock up, it's got to be this one. And it's not always easy because you've got a lot of 2-year-olds, some of whom but you're not always completely expert on all of them. And I remember doing the prep for that the night before, thinking I want to have all of these 2-year-olds in my head before I do the job. But generally, if it's a relatively normal meeting with sort of 60, 70 runners across the card, I am, and again, I might be putting the kibosh on this, I'm relatively confident in my ability to learn the colours on the day, race by race. And sometimes you're lucky as well. I do lots of Newcastles or I do lots of Wolverhamptons, and they're horses that you see quite regularly. So sometimes you see a race and think, I've called 5 or 6 of these horses before, they're in my brain already. Got to add a few new ones in there, but it's not desperately difficult. So I don't generally see the need to do much preparation the night before, unless I'm doing a huge field. And if I ever did do, the Great St Wilfrid Handicap or something like that, then I'd be doing a bit the day before, I think, yes.
Is there ever a favourite race course you've been to? Because you've mentioned Wolverhampton, you've mentioned Newcastle. Is there ever like one you can pick where like that's my favourite? Or
well, this is going to sound like a really kind of PC answer, or you might say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? But I can't think of too many that I don't like. We're extremely fortunate to do this job. There are 1 or 2 racetracks. The commentary position is a bit difficult, and I wished it was in a different place because it would make it a bit easier. But in terms of my favourites, Hexham, obviously, it's my hometown track, and I've always liked going back there. And Newcastle as well. I've got many happy memories going to Newcastle races as a kid, and now working there. And obviously, I've still got family up there. Others, though, for different reasons. Happy Valley, I think, is as spectacular a place as I've ever been to, and I still enjoy the fact that I've got to work quite a bit on shows from there. But even places that don't get much publicity in this country aren't necessarily talked about as being great venues. I really enjoy. I do like working at Wolverhampton, actually, because if your cameras all went down, your screen went down at Wolverhampton, you can watch them all the way around on your binoculars and do a good call on your binoculars, and that is definitely a good thing to have, because if you're a Doncaster and they're going behind the they're going over Rose Hill behind the trees and your cameras went down, you'd have no chance of doing a call with your binoculars. So yeah, I like them all really, but I suppose especially Hexham and Happy Valley.
And the final question from me is, what advice would you give to students like myself, or maybe wanting to go into broadcasting, knowing you've been there? What advice would you give to them to maybe achieve the dreams?
Well, it's difficult. Well, you've got to work hard. You've got to be really passionate about the sport. You've got to really like the sport, and you've got to then, once you decide you're going to get involved, you've got to take it seriously. Not in the sense that you're going to be miserable about it or lacking in humor about it, but you've got to think, well, I can't just do this in a really slapdash manner. I've really got to work hard. It's a different environment, though, Michael, from what it's like now, in the sense that I had to send CVs off to places in the post, and I just got very, very lucky. And from that luck, I've just been able to chisel out a career. There'll be many people who'll send off CVs to places and get nowhere near as lucky as I did. But my advice would be to get as educated as you can be, go as far at school, college, at university as you can, because although it's not vital, it is important. And I think my first boss told me I only got the job because I had a university degree and the person next to me, who was the other best candidate for the job, didn't. So get yourself as educated as you can be, and then work hard, but also be patient. Be patient, because certainly in race calling, you've got a long career, and I didn't do my first race call till I was 31. And that's a late career start for a lot of people in lots of other jobs. And broadcasting, there are lots of outlets now. There's the whole industry as far as podcasts and stuff like that are concerned. So get yourself in a situation where you do broadcasts, you get comfortable in that environment, you understand about working to time limits and stuff like that, and just get involved and try and find as many outlets for your interest as you possibly can.
Well, John, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for giving up your time on your day off. And
not a problem.
Hopefully speak to you soon. Thank you.
Will do. All the best, Michael.